I realized the third through the recording that the leather strap is squeaking on the watch, and now I can't use it because you're just going to be hearing this the whole way through. Okay, start again. I cannot believe that we are already midway through 2024, but there you go. And with it, I thought I would drop a sort of mid-year roundup of some of the best watches that have caught our attention. So from January to June, the list started with 70 watches. I've whittled it down to about 40. I've no idea how long this recording is going to be or how long the editing is going to take, but the more I spend editing, the more convenient it'll be for you. So let's get into it. Part of the aim for this video was to try and capture the pieces that epitomize the first half of this year. The ones that maybe have seen the most coverage and the ones that we are probably the most interested in. So we're probably not going to see all the top-end horology pieces that are entirely bespoke and appeal to a very small market. Instead, I want to focus on the watches that are more attainable and more affordable to us. But more importantly, it's the designs of these pieces that I want to bring across, that I want to share. How they maybe capture a certain time period, how their sizes are appropriate, or is there something of an X factor to them that makes them unique and different. So in no particular order, but I've tried to keep it chronological, the Eska Amphibian 250. Just another really faithful recreation of a diver that debuted in 1959, and I'm a huge fan of these. If you know me well enough, if you know this channel, the reissue dive watch is a special place in my heart. There is so much character to this piece, from its typeface to the insanely oversized Arabic numerals, to the bezel insert with that OCD-inducing 5 and 55 on either side of the triangle. I think I like it because it seems to be a watch that's in two worlds. One half, it looks like it's appealing to that 1950s, late 1950s aesthetic. On the other side, it also looks like something that's transitioning into being a skin diver. So it's got both elements shared quite nicely. Of course, the faux patina you can either love or hate. I think a lot of us would agree it's kind of overstayed its welcome, but it looks pretty good on this piece. It does represent the time period. Now, the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Of course, we know the Swatch Scuba collaboration was a big deal, and I've highlighted the Ocean of Storms model for that reason. Now, I could have also gone down the road to highlight the 42mm 50 Fathoms that arrived that nobody seemed to talk about or be very interested in. Particularly because of the price, because the design looks almost identical to the 45mm piece. But of all the Swatch collaboration bioceramic pieces, the Oceans of Storms does get a good point across. Not only giving real purpose to the use of its color, the dark case gives it a very stealthy look, also emphasizing the plots, the numerals on the dial, the handset. Frankly, I think of all the configurations, this one just looks fitting, and it suits the 50 Fathoms down to the ground. Now, something about the 1960s Timex Marlin Jet, recreation, reissue, reimagining, it appealed to me. I don't know if it's 100% faithful to the original. I'm sure its size is up and its thickness looks quite bizarre, but you know, the silver dial, the black inserts on the hands, the black inserts on the markers, the pole router-esque dividing lines, the chapter ring, the deep dish to the dial, all of these nuances, they do characterize the 1960s aesthetic, and I think that's why it's so well captured. Now, to our surprise, we saw the reintroduction, or I don't know, another reinterpretation of the Dark Side of the Moon Speedmaster, a watch that none of us have been asking to be adjusted or changed, but there we go. The modifications to this watch are so subtle that most people wouldn't even notice unless you look at it under a microscope. Telltale sign is seeing the Apollo spaceship on the running seconds hand on the left subdial, and as much as it is a watch that appeals to a certain audience, I enjoy it for that sheer color contrast, the level of detail that the original watch had. Much preferred the first generation and how the skeletonizing was better emphasized on the dial. Nevertheless, it's a good looking piece. Now, Longines dropped something great, the Heritage Conquest Central Power Reserve. This piece has a fascinating history that I implore you to look up, but the design is very close, very faithful to the original watch. Along with the proportions and other elements, the only things that have really changed that are most notable is the case dimensions. But the core trait of this watch, quite literally at the core, is the power reserve. The ability of you being able to see it going up and down as you wind it, as you wear it. The Heritage Collection is fantastic. I'll link a video in the corner that I made a couple of months back about my favorite watches in this range. And if you want my opinion, these pieces are some of the best in the industry. Value for money, unique designs. It just doesn't get better. But if we're talking more about a mainstream collection that seems to be rivaling the likes of Omega's Aquaterra, then the Conquest 38mm range was a real surprise. The dials on these pieces, they just keep pulling you back for more. They are so charming. When you compare it to the likes of Omega's Shades collection, it makes you question, like, It is baffling to see what Longines can offer you for what, a third of the price? From all of the applied elements to the date at the 6 o'clock position, the sun-brushed finishing, the modern Rolex Air King-inspired case with those crown guards. Year on year, it just seems like Longines loves creating these compelling pieces. And then to a watch that has a close place in my heart that I chose because I love the design and this color in particular, the boutique blue Zenith Pilot Chronograph. They took the original template of the black dial configuration and just added that 5% that gives it all the more character, depth. You can see so much more on this dial. Next to that, quite an oddball, the Zenith Chronomaster Sport in green. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the original watch was made in collaboration with an NFL football star, and this is their more mainline product choice. This choice of green is about 2 to 3 years late to the party, but it still looks pretty good. I always find it interesting seeing how the brand tackles the subdials, the different colorways. Speaking of green, a watch that raised quite a few eyebrows, the Heuer Carrera, or the Tag Heuer Carrera Dato 9 Glassbox. Like many of the other Carrera glass boxes of this new family, they're pulling inspiration directly from watches of their mid-60s catalogs. And the fun fact about these pieces is that they are some of the earliest Carreras to ever adopt a date complication. Now yes, there is a lot of impracticality with this watch. There is no running seconds hand, there is only one 30-minute totalizer. It takes a lot of guts to release a watch like this that is so minimalist, especially as a chronograph. But when you start looking to the brushing on the dial, the different textures used, the subtlety to this watch is what ultimately allows it to stand out. The Piaget Polo 79, following in the footsteps of the likes of the Vacheron Constantin 222, we have another variant of an integrated sports watch. This arguably being the most iconic Piaget ever made. The Polo in all its glory, right at the height of hitting the 1980s, the late 1970s. This watch arrived at the perfect time, using the likes of precious metal, fashion, and a sport like polo as its backbone. Great looking watch, well interpreted, albeit quite late to the party. One thing that's worth looking at and appreciating is how the brushing and polishing work off one another. And like I said, it's one of the most influential watch designs of all time. It is Piaget's icon. Next to that, a watch that seemed to have arrived and disappeared just as fast was Omega's Constellation Manhattan with a Meteorite dial. Something to this watch catches my eye. In a lot of ways, it's dealing with the anachronistic design nature of 1980s, where there was just some bizarre choices made. The Roman numerals on the bezel especially helped define this certain collection. But seeing this bezel now incorporate ceramic and liquid metal, and then that contrasting meteorite texture, it looks great. This one gives you a sample of what an integrated bracelet can look like with a slightly more modern, but a retro-inspired edge. Now, Yema has been doing a lot of work. Disappearing are the Celita-based calibers and the ETAs beforehand. They're now approaching their watches with what they're calling the CMM20 caliber. They're also claiming it to be in-house produced since it is made in France. And it's a really beautiful caliber with a micro-rotor and all sorts of details. And with that, they gave us a faithful recreation of their original skin diver, which is also about 38-39 millimeters in diameter. It's a limited edition piece. It doesn't appeal to everyone, but I couldn't let this one go without talking about it. Now, one of the mainline releases of this year that's quite the showstopper that definitely defines 2024 is Omega's white dial Speedmaster with the 3861 caliber. This one was a surprise. It got everyone talking, and I think many more are still waiting on receiving one. There are lots of things to like about it, but more than anything, it's going against the conventional approach of a simple black dial with white accents. You could say that the brand has spared no expense here, since every plot has been applied. Black rhodium plated, I believe. But then it brings into the question of whether or not it's more legible than the standard piece. Whether this is a watch you should be pursuing only after the fact, after you've bought a standard black dial. You can't deny it though, that yin and yang shared between these two pieces, how there is a give and take between both of them, and how each of them have their strengths and weaknesses either way. Now, another watch that took us by surprise that subsequently became the cover photo watch for this video, Tudor's Blancpain chronograph in pink. If I remember right, it's made in collaboration with Inter Milan FC, and it's a piece that has taken the internet by storm. I think owing to the fact that Tudor have called this watch a limited edition piece, which I guess we could take with a pinch of salt. It's also been seen on the wrist of all sorts of personalities and celebrities, so naturally, word has got out that this is a highly sought after and collectible piece. Is it a watch that's made for me? No. But is it a watch that's daring? Does it not line up with Tudor's ethos and mentality? Absolutely. No doubt it's going to continue to be popular, and it's also ushered us into the Tudor chronograph on a Jubilee craze phase. A nice surprise from Seiko was an update on the Prospex SPB range. Where it was once the SPB 143, they're now highlighting the SPB 451. Quite a few adjustments and changes, obviously pulling from the original 62 MAS. Being an owner of the previous generation, what I'm liking most about this piece is the adjustment of text on the dial. I'm enjoying the date placement, which I know is not everyone's favorite. A date at the 3 o'clock position is far more faithful. But it does hide away quite nicely between the 4 and the 5. Other small improvements are the fact that it's now rated to 300 meters, that it's now thinner in profile, and that day after day it's looking more and more like an original 62 MAS. Which I don't understand why they just don't upscale the watch and make it as a mainline product at this point. I mean, what are they doing? Now to a release that really caught my eye. The Girard-Perregaux Laureato Titanium Chronograph. This watch looks spectacular. When you combine the right metal with the right dial, the right texture, everything seems to work. And yes, we are on the back end of the integrated bracelet craze, but even still, this watch I think stands on its own. These Laureato chronographs, they've been slept on for a long time, and I think they do deserve a lot more love and attention. News from Bulgari this year, the Octo Finissimo receiving a sketch dial. Not for everyone, I doubt it would be a watch that you would wear on a daily basis, but there is something so characterful about seeing a hand-drawn dial. Similar to a Patek Philippe we've seen in the past, similar to a Zenith that used a blueprint dial. This sort of work appeals to me for its abstractedness or abstractness, I don't know if that's a word. It truly looks like the dial maker or the designer took a fine point pen and sketched out what this watch looks like on the inside. And then to the Moser Streamliner Tourbillon Skeleton, another huge standout from the brand, very significant watch. I think without the fume effect and the texture on this dial, it loses some of that Moser charm and character. There is a lot to like about this piece, albeit it seems to deviate quite far away from how I imagine the Streamliner to look. Now, of all the watches on this list, this one's a standout, but it's also a sleeper. The Angelus Instrument de Vitesse. Just a beautiful 1940s inspired monopusher that is so clean, it's so balanced, it has all the traits that I like so much about a watch. Now these were made in a limited edition run, I think only 250 of them exist on a black dial or a white dial, but I think they are just absolutely gorgeous. But of all the watches we've seen so far, and probably for the rest of the year, this is going to rank in my top 5, I can guarantee it. To one of the flagship heavy hitters this year, the Patek Philippe 5236P. What's most important about this watch is it's an inline perpetual calendar. It's not the first of its kind, but the fact that it's a salmon dial. And if I'm being honest, the thing I appreciate most about this watch is that Disco Volante style case. Very 1960s straight cut hands, those faceted plots. And it's how a watch of this kind manages to do more with less that makes it so appealing. I do really like the symmetry of this watch, but I do wish that those windows were not white, but rather a slate grey, something less obtrusive. Maybe instead a grey with a white print on top. Just when it seemed like the Duometre line was disappearing and a part of JLC's history, so the brand reignited it with a full-on tourbillon, calendars, chronographs, you name it, the whole deal. A watch of this kind deserves an entire video by itself, but it's the kind of watch that someone like Tim Mosso should be talking about. But there's nothing plain, there's nothing basic or entry-level about these pieces. They are at the higher end, some of the most complex watches in the world. Hopping across to A.Lange Sohne, celebrating an anniversary of the Datograph, they decided to give us, and I'll have to read from my notes because it's such a long name, the Datograph Perpetual Tourbillon Lumen in honey gold. This watch is just pure overkill of the best kind. It's bad enough having a Datograph that's also a tourbillon, but adding a lumen aspect to it and a honey gold finish. Something only reserved for special anniversary pieces. I mean, we know that this watch is highly bespoke and very few of them are going to be made, but we can still appreciate just the levels and depths they go when you turn this watch around and see that movement. And so coming back down to earth, Tudor has had a really good year. The Black Bay 58 GMT was a watch that definitely caught my attention after talking about it for 3+ years. And even still, they were able to surprise us with the choice of gilt accents on the bezel, a coke finish instead of the standard Pepsi blue and red, 2 lines of text on the dial, a better scale and proportion for day-to-day wearing. And I think so many people are appreciating this watch for its versatility. Many are getting enjoyment out of it because it's able to adapt to different situations. And as a contrast, quite literally, the Black Bay 41 Monochrome, this being a far simpler take of last year's Burgundy variant, and manages to do a lot with less, in fact answering the call of a standard, very stark white print Black Bay diver that we hadn't seen in near to a decade. Up to this point, these watches were never sterile, there was always something different about them. And we could say in this monochrome configuration that this Black Bay 41 is Tudor's answer to the Rolex Submariner. Another absolute standout of the year is Cartier's Privé Tortue monopusher chronograph. Got that one. A recreation, a reinterpretation of a past classic that has so much collector appeal that everybody loves. It's the dynamism of this case that speaks to me the most, instead of the standard square shape of the tank or the more hard-edged styling of the Santos. This oblong tortoise-shaped case with more rounded edges, more like a pebble, it speaks to the 1920s and the 1930s. Once again, a beautiful level of restraint and detail added here, the Breguet hands, the heat bluing. It is the epitome of Cartier's design and it deserves to be celebrated. Now, running through this list, we notice that Rolex hasn't really featured at all. That's because they haven't given us anything truly exciting this year. Maybe besides the deep sea and solid gold, which was quite interesting, but the 1908 in platinum with this beautiful ice blue guilloche dial. Now we're talking. What I like most about it is it's not the conventional sports watch. It's completely against what Rolex is known for at this stage. And with that, we're able to appreciate a different side of the brand, one side that we never see. The fact that Rolex is now introducing these more artisanal approaches, this machine finishing, a finer touch to their watches, and in fact pursuing the dress watch as opposed to the sports watch. There's no knowing whether or not this will work with the likes of Lange, Patek, and every other name under the sun, but hey, at least they're trying. So really, of all the interesting watches that brands have given us this year, Rolex really hasn't come to the party very much. I guess you could look at the GMT and appreciate it, but it's nothing groundbreaking or mind-blowing. Now, as a stark contrast to that, playing off the 1908 in a way, I think Grand Seiko may have just made the perfect watch. If you close your eyes and think about this brand, the Birch Bark SLGW003, from the texture on the dial that we have come to know and love, to the plots, to the choice of handset, when you turn the case around and see that incredible movement. If I could own a Grand Seiko tomorrow, this would be it. But of course, it's a limited edition and barely any of us will be able to get our hands on one. It's just the way it goes. IWC went down a different road this year with the Portuguese collection. And the models that definitely take the spot for the highlight is the Horizon Blue. From perpetual calendars to chronographs to simple time-onlys, they have readjusted the entire range. And as most of us know, their perpetual calendars, they are some of the best in the world. We criticize IWC a lot with their manufacturing choices a lot of the time, with the movements that they use. And considering that this new perpetual range especially has an accuracy of something like 100 million years before needing to be adjusted, I can't remember the numbers, but it's ludicrous. It is a testament to their work ethic and the kinds of watches that they can produce. And now back to Zenith again with the Defied Diver, a range of watches that arrived, disappeared, nobody seemed to take notice. The one I've decided to highlight is the A3648 with the orange accents. I adore this watch because it is just such an oddity. The Defy range is a complete collection in itself as a modern package, but these older inspired pieces, they always appeal to me. Definitely not a watch for everyone, but as far as reissue divers go, this one can't be missed. After the grand success of the Hermes H08, the Hermes Cut has now arrived. Quite late to the party, quite late to the integrated bracelet craze. Very similar to the H08, designed to be that unisex piece, and I've highlighted it especially because I really enjoy the case design. It reminds me of a watch like the Icopod with its pebble form factor. I'm still questioning why the crown is at the 1 o'clock position on this piece, but it is playing with the fashion feel, and I think looking at 1920s, 1930s, especially the typeface, you do get that aesthetic. Is it a watch that will stand the test of time? That remains to be seen. But will it be a watch that people will pursue? I can almost guarantee it. Now, Parmigiani Fleurier, they gave us something quite exciting. They reignited, brought back to life, the Toric collection. From a standard time only to a chronograph, these are gorgeous looking watches. Very similar to the integrated bracelet piece that they made a couple of years ago that I really enjoyed. This range playing again with that minimalism, with the coin edging on the bezel. Simple plots for the hours, cutaways, sections to the dials. And I think what they nailed the most, not the straps look hideous, but the dials. Now they speak volumes. These soft pastel hues will definitely allow for these watches to have a strong footing. The Tag Heuer Aqua Racer Professional 300. This watch arrived and received mixed reviews. A lot are calling it a remake of the Seamaster 300, and just by looking at the name, Professional 300, does leave you scratching your head. When you see this watch compared side by side with a Seamaster Professional, makes it even more interesting. Lacking the helium escape crown, looking at the plots on the dial, even looking to the hour hand, and we see that it has a sword edge to it. What I find most interesting about these pieces is how they're using color to their advantage, but also the texture on the dial. I think the texture is one of the most appealing aspects of this piece. There is no symmetry, there is no balance, it looks far more organic, and it works. Now, another watch we could say that defines the early half of 2024 is the Audemars Piguet Remaster 2. In a lot of ways, this brutalism, I mean, I really like it. You can imagine, looks very Giugiaro, looks very Cybertruck of this generation. Definitely has that 1970s appeal. There have been a lot of complaints by enthusiasts saying that if this watch was not an Audemars Piguet, then it wouldn't be receiving the attention that it has. But then the designer in me says, if this said Seiko on its dial, I would still be looking at it. There is a lot to like about the design and the execution of this watch, especially how they've scaled it up, how they've used different materials, and even that placement of the Audemars Piguet name on this dial. It looks brilliant. Not a piece for everyone, but it's definitely a watch for those who appreciate design and form over function and practicality. Now in this list, I have featured Hublot, the Big Bang 38. Something about this watch pulling back to its roots, being inspired by those older models, it appeals to me. Exorbitantly priced, as you would imagine, coming in all sorts of different materials, titanium, ceramic. But more than anything, what appeals to me most about this watch is the dial. And of course, the size. This might very well bring in an entirely new community of Hublot enthusiasts. Now, between you and me, my favorite Tudor release of the year, and not on the prescribed list, but it's the FXD Pro Cycling variant. I have nicknamed this watch the FXD Darth Vader for obvious reasons, and there are so many great details about this watch that I won't get into now. It's the full carbon composite case, it's the all black finish, it's the fact that that scale running around the inside bezel, which has been applied separately, looks like a velodrome. There is sports, there's utility, there's stealth to this watch, and it appeals to my inner nature because the FXD is my absolute favorite watch that Tudor makes. So 100%, I'm biased. What can you do? Now the thing is, with the integrated bracelet craze coming to a screeching halt, the Credor Locomotive arrives, and tons of coverage on some of the popular websites, but most of us just aren't even looking at them anymore. Bearing in mind it's a very significant watch, and quite an important one. Also designed by Gerald Genta, wouldn't you believe? I didn't take enough time to look up the full history of this watch, but we can imagine it has the same sorts of inspiration that went into the Royal Oak, and the Nautilus, and the Pole Router, and every other watch. What is good to see is how faithful this watch is to the original, how this recreation truly plays with the facets, the polishing, the brushing, the beautiful dial texture. But at this stage, we've just seen these designs repeated again and again. It's getting tiresome. It's also a limited edition watch, probably won't be able to get your hands on one, but it definitely does define this phase of 2024. The Oris Aquis has had a peculiar year with its releases, because the watches look practically identical to the previous generation. Behind the scenes though, the brand has done so many small and subtle updates to this watch that you would barely be able to realize unless you're looking at it with a magnifying glass. But the watch that has stood out to me from the brand this year is the all-black Holstein edition, the 65 Diver. This also feels like 2, 3, 4 years late to the party, but what can you do? It's a good looking watch. Now Seiko's been doing some good work. Seemingly out of nowhere, they unveiled a sort of recreation of the King Seiko, the original King Seiko, the 1969. They call this the KS1969, giving us that classic razor-edged case and a 6L35 movement, if I'm not mistaken. But the one model that definitely stood out to me the most, that stood out far more than the Prospex line at least, is this Presage style 60s variant. A gorgeous GMT that plays with dial texture, lots of applied elements, Dauphine hands, a great use of subtlety, and a choice of colors and materials that looks distinctly Seiko. This, I think, is another line of watches that you should be looking into. And finally, the watch I've left for last, the Omega Aquaterra Gloss Black. This was a welcome surprise, a very subtle launch from the brand, one that I think they have done so well, and in many ways I think it highlights the very best of Omega as a brand, but also highlights the very worst. And I'll link the video I made about this watch in the corner of the screen. As an added bonus, just as I'm finishing this recording, so Tudor has announced the new ceramic variant of their Black Bay with a blue dial in collaboration with the Toro Rosso Formula 1 team. This master chronometer piece was advertised as a watch that was going to just be for the team, but it seems like it's become a mainline product. Maybe all the more reason why you should be holding back on getting the pink dial Black Bay chronograph, just waiting a little bit until the hype dies down. So that, in a 100+ minute long recording nutshell, are the 40 best watches that I think epitomize 2024, at least the first half of this year. So by the end of the year, I'll be doing a full recap highlighting the best watches of 2024. But which of these pieces appealed to you the most? What watches stood out to you the best at Watches and Wonders? Has anything significant from this year's releases taken your interest? Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.